Yesterday on the can, it looked like two of the chicks were pecking at the food. Now their tosses, if I remember right, isn't developed enough for them to stand on it and tear the food.
Yeah, there's several more things that have to happen in the life of these birds. You know my 30-30-20 thing. Well, the first 30 days has gone almost entirely into fat. That's why they look like a pear. You know, all that weight is down here in the bottom part. The next 30 days or so is going to go into building muscle and building coordination, and then the final 20 days they're going to spend a whole lot of time exercising, building up particularly the pectoral muscles here, so that they'll be able to launch out of the nest and be able to stay afloat while they're doing that. But the coordination part of it, being able to balance themselves, I noticed a little confusion over standing and walking. Just like a human baby can stand for 3, 4, 5 weeks before it can take the first couple of steps and actually walk. It's pretty much the same thing for the eagles. For their first few times that you see them get up on the feet, primarily while they're getting up on the feet, is to bend over and squirt off, and looks like it's been painted up there. Actually, if you're doing peregrine work, which is usually on cliffs, that's what you look for. You look for that white that's shining off the edge of the cliffs. That tells you exactly where to look for the peregrines. And if you're doing eagle flights, as Brian can tell you, sometimes that helps because it reflects off the nest, the light does. But being able to stand, and then it takes a couple more weeks or so for them to build up the muscle, to be able to take the step, be able to support their weight. Plus the fact that you all noticed that at first they had that little nest cup that they were all cuddled down in, and now that nest cup is much bigger and much flatter. Well, eventually that whole nest will become flat. Right now it's a little difficult for them to try to walk because the unevenness of the nest. That will flatten out and make it a whole lot easier for them to be able to stand and walk. But in order to be able to feed for themselves, it's not just a matter of being able to swallow the food, which they're capable of doing now. They've got to be able to hold onto the fish. They've got to be able to twist and turn, which is a skill they still need to develop. So all of that is what you will see happen in the next couple weeks in the nest. Questions? Yes?
I have a question, mostly about, not about this nest, but about the eagles that are hatched in captivity and are released through hatching towers, etc. How do they learn to hunt? I was thinking about the one in the Raptor Center. I mean, he's gone.
Right.
The one from last year, he flew away, but how do we know if he knows how to hunt? He was never taught.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Learning to hunt is both an acquired skill and an innate skill. And I don't know if maybe Dr. Watts knows whether or not there have been any studies done to determine whether released birds like that are more successful. The other part of that, being in captivity, is not being subject to all the hazards that they would be subject to, and being able to defend themselves, learning to defend themselves properly. You've all noticed the aggression, particularly of the oldest chick. That's an absolute essential for survival. If they can't defend themselves, that agonistic behavior, it's not only knowing when to fight, but when not to fight. When to just give up and fly off and let them have the territory, or let the aggressor have the fish. They need to know how to do both. They need to know when it's good to stand their ground, when they've got the ability, got the skill, and got the strength to defend themselves, and when to just give up and let somebody else have the right. But survival, probably the most common reason that they perish is they simply don't learn to find enough food for themselves. That's in addition to opportunities that we provide, like power lines and other objects that they can fly into. Just not learning the skills that they need for themselves is probably the most common reason that they don't make it to adulthood. So I don't know the specific answer to your question, because I don't know if the studies have been
It's like taking a
done.
5-year-old child and putting him in the wilderness and saying, live.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
we hacked about 500 peregrines in the state, and there are a couple of key things with hacking. One is that they be able to self-feed. You just talked about birds being able to break up the food, so they need to be able to self-feed, so they need to be old enough for that. But then the second important thing is that there's usually a transition period where the birds are learning to hunt, but they're being supplemented, just like adults would do. But the peregrines, they'll start to hunt in the first day when they're on the wing. They'll start to hunt dragonflies, then move over to birds fairly quickly. But during that transition period, when they're not able to get enough food for themselves, food is being provided to them. So there's a transition period. It's the same thing that while the adults will supplement food until the point where the chicks typically will not want it anymore and can feed it themselves. So in the hacking program, there is that transition period that allows them to have time to learn the provision themselves.
And I was involved with hacking of the first peregrine out of Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge back in '79 or '80, and we lost all the chicks. One of the things that we learned is the relationship between the peregrine falcon and the great horned owl is not very friendly. All those chicks were picked off by great horned owls. And we had just 5 or 6 years ago, one of the transmitters on a peregrine that stopped sending all of a sudden. We knew where it was a Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, but all of a sudden it just stopped sending a signal. Then all of a sudden the signal, about 6 months later, the signal popped up again. Sean Paget, who does a lot of the peregrine work in the area, and I went down there and we found the transmitter. It had, the peregrine had apparently been picked up by a great horned owl, carried about 200 yards, fed on it, dropped it on the ground, landed upside down, and the transmitter stopped sending. A squirrel or fox or a raccoon or something prowling around in the woods found it, turned it upside, and the signal started going again, but all we found was the transmitter and a skeleton left. So that's nature, that's part of what you'll see. Well, today, if you don't have any other questions, you want
I have
back
one
here?
quick question about the transmitter this year. There's not going to be one, is that right?
That's correct. We're not going to put it's a difficult decision, but the data that we're gathering from both Zaya and Camellia has been pretty substantial and very helpful to us. And it's pretty obvious that Camellia and Zaya are not following each other around. Or Camellia is not following Zaya around. He's pretty much doing his own thing. To my knowledge, they have only overlapped twice. One is Jamestown and once in Hampton, where they were in the same place at the same time, likely saw each other. They've been pretty close, like both of them been here in Virginia Beach several times at the same time, but in different parts of the beach. Do they see each other when they get 300, 400, 500 feet up in the air? Probably, but if so, they're not telling us that. I mean, there's so much information we can get, but that's something we still don't know. But obviously, they're keeping their space. I had a call yesterday from the fish biologist at the Tidewater Research Station down at Plymouth, North Carolina, the catfish farm. And I told him what to look for, the antenna, and sure enough, he called and said, "She's here this morning." Yeah, my data shows that she's been there for 4 days. So that's confirmation, one, that the satellite data is pretty accurate. But we've not seen Camellia go down there yet. Maybe he just hasn't found it. I guess say she.
We noticed that sometimes when they come in together, she'll mantle and like not even guarding anything, just like crouch down. And the other day when we brought the fish in and she came in, I mean, I know they don't have dirty looks, but she gave him a dirty look.
Well, they may have a dirty look.
I know.
I noticed somebody commented that that would look like submissive behavior. I doubt that.
I
I doubt that.
More like warning.
It's obviously it can be the other way around, particularly the first couple days. The female is very protective. They are her chicks. And she will sometimes even not let the male come back. At first, he's got to kind of work his way into the nest. And we saw that particularly a couple of years ago. We didn't see much of that this year.
Well,
All right.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. I was
Ann?
just gonna say it might be, I was here last night and early this morning, and twice the male had stolen a fish from an osprey. And the osprey was right on top of that eagle. So I'm wondering when that fish hit the nest, if they don't protect it from the osprey.
And that could be too, yeah.
Yeah, that might be part of it, sure, when they mantle like
The
that.
only one in the morning.
Okay.
Okay, I've had instructions to ask you this, because we get it every day, over and over. Will two siblings mate? We don't know unless you see them with bands.
Yeah, I don't think we know that either.
That's what
I think the dispersion of the eagle population prevents that for most days. Plus, only about 50% of them are going to survive. But there's, I guess, some possibility that will happen. It happens in the human population.
Right, it's always possible.
So I think that it's possible, but because of the dispersion, as we've seen, they wander pretty widely, may end up in totally different locations. Maybe different generations may eventually end up. I think that's something probably needs a lot more study.